Welcome to Lunchtime Live. I'm Leslie.
I'm Ed.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody. Please say hi in the comments. And I wanted to take the beginning of this episode really quickly to do some housekeeping, which is to say, some people say, I don't get notified when your live stream starts. Here's how you can do that. If you go down right below this video, if you scroll down a little bit, there is it'll be kind of here, right below here. There will be a red subscribe button. So make sure that's clicked if you aren't already subscribed. And then next to it, there's a little perfectly drawn school bell. So click that and then you will get notified when we have our live streams. You'll get an hour notice. We do email our community, but we're trying not to do that too much just because I don't want to be that person emailing everybody all the time.
Yep.
Yeah. So that is how to find us. And we were just talking as one other announcement really quick, which is that on December 13th, we are going to be recording our 100th podcast episode. So that's a different show than what we're doing now, right? So this is Lunchtime Live. Our podcast, we pre-record on Mondays and it comes out on Tuesdays. But because it's our 100th episode,
Sort of special.
we have to make a fuss.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to live stream that. So we'll give you guys lots of notifications on that. You can join in the conversation. I was thinking we can make it like a Q&A.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Which I think would be fun. This is our 4th or 5th year of podcasting. This will be our 100th episode.
I was I'm impressed, I guess, by the statistic that the number of podcasts that sort of end after a very few episodes.
7.
It's 7 is kind of
7.
the magic number.
Yeah, if you get past 7, apparently you're fine. I was I think we were still faking it at 7. But yeah, apparently they don't make it that far.
Stunning.
I know. I think we started, this is such a good segue. I think we started with minimal expectations.
Uh-huh.
Lots of curiosity.
Right. Lots of unknowns.
A very much a beginner mindset,
Yep.
Amateur mindset of let's figure it out as we go. And we also didn't set ourselves up to burn out because we
Right.
did it kind of every 2 weeks. It was every 2 weeks-ish.
It was pretty loose.
It was very, yeah.
Yeah.
The published day was whenever I got around to it, to editing it was kind of how we did it.
Well, it never would have happened if I'd been entrusted with it. So there we go.
It's teamwork.
Teamwork
Makes the dream work. So we've come a long way, Ed.
Yeah. And it's just kind of stick-to-itiveness, right?
Yeah.
It's that sort of basic consistency, and it hasn't been absolutely perfect.
Right.
Right? In its production.
Nice. Yeah. So we just recorded a podcast, as I just said. And it was one of the topics we ended up on was this idea of progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
A lot of us, I will definitely speak for myself in this, are kind of fall into that overachiever category. And are, tend to go for perfection. If it's not 100%, then you might as well give up.
There you are.
Is kind of the mindset.
Yeah.
Which, when you say it out loud, sounds ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Because there's, the thing on Peloton, I was I'm going to do Peloton every day. I did that a couple years ago. I'm going to do yoga every day.
Yeah.
And then I miss a day. And then I end up missing 3 more weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I have that perfectionistic mindset of it's all over now.
Yes. Well, we were talking a little bit earlier about this book, The End of Procrastination, that I'm trying to read, not procrastinating, getting to it. But he actually makes the comment that if you set up a schedule for yourself and it collapses at day 3, the whole thing collapses. Mm-hmm. So there's almost no in-between ground. And I think the more we get into this topic, the more fascinated I am by it, because obviously proficiency is something that we aim for good reason.
Sure.
Right. Musically, you do this, right?
Sure.
And you think about physicians, scientists, just watching that most wonderful movie, Hidden Figures, about the space program, right? And how much it was supported by women of color who had to have all the numbers right.
Yeah.
Because lives were depending on that.
Yeah.
So there are always areas of life where things really have to be right. However, I think the problem is that we start transferring that into all areas of life, where in fact, having some roominess not to do things so, according to a certain perfect standard, it's not desirable in those ways, right? I remember the first time I ever saw Navajo blankets or blankets that had been made by Navajo. And there's often a little mistake that's woven into the fabric because it's believed that that's where the sort of spirit of the thing
that's beautiful
enters and moves and gets out. And it's just it's also a humble expression. Be humble about this.
Yeah.
So there's an area where getting everything absolutely right isn't desirable. And maybe this is a big thing in life, is to figure out which is which.
When I started getting into woodworking, my father reminded me of the idea of tolerances. In everything, there are tolerances, because actually, if you make something too perfect, the pieces won't fit together. You actually need a little space. For the pieces to fit. Like, I think of, this is a very specific example, but we did in our living room this I never know what to call it, it's a board and batten or all this excessive amount of trim. It's really fun. And you do the verticals and the full detailed look. And I got for Gus for Christmas a laser measure little gadget, which is so accurate. It's down, I think it must be to the 32nd. It's down to the 32nd. So you put it and you push it and it gives you the exact measurement. I mean, I've basically claimed it as my own now. But the problem was when you then take that measurement and you take it downstairs and you cut to that measurement, you can't get the piece in and it won't have space for the other pieces. So it's it's too, you have to have tolerances. So every time I try to wedge something in because it's so perfect, I think of my father going, tolerances.
Yeah. Isn't that, a story's coming to mind I hadn't thought of for quite a while, but when my grandfather died, he was a blacksmith, came to this country and was a blacksmith, but then had to convert it to a small truck body shop. And there were people who came after he died. We had the wake, and people came from all over the city, who had worked with him over the years. And one man told me that he had always worked with a stick. It wasn't a yardstick. It was just a stick.
A stick.
And he would pull his truck. This man would pull his truck into the shop and say, I need this and done and that done. And my grandfather would walk around the truck with his stick and keep all these measurements in his head. And then the guy would leave. And then after a certain period of weeks when the work was done, a person would come in and everything that he needed to have happen was there. I think he must have had this idea of tolerances in his mind, right? He wasn't after perfection. He was after the right fit.
Right.
So maybe things were a little bit off in some ways, but it all worked together in terms of the truck body.
It's very funny because I actually just watched a video on, have you heard of Drive Tribe?
No.
So Drive Tribe is the newest media version of the guys from Top Gear way back when, who then became the guys of Grand Tour.
Yes.
And now they're on YouTube. So Richard Hammond...
It's a progression.
Yeah. Richard Hammond restored a car, and he was talking about how these were hand-hewn vehicles, and the parts didn't fit together. I mean, they did, but they did because one part was made to match the other part, was made to match the other part. And so the left and the right weren't the same, weren't mirror images of each other. They were just the version that was made.
Sure.
They were not punched out of some sheet of aluminum or something.
Right. Can we stay with this riff for a moment?
Go for it.
All right. So when I graduated from seminary, I went to serve as an assistant minister at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, Scotland. And so it's a place where there are often these very big festival services for the city and the country of Scotland and so on. And so I worked in a sea of perfectionists while I was there in every possible way, which was wonderful. But when I was talking one night with a man who had been at St. Giles for his entire adult life, I said, so, as you look back, what were the things that most stand out in your mind? And he said, the mistakes. And he talked about one time when there were these two processions that were supposed to enter into the cathedral, and they were both supposed to go to their determined spots, but in fact they collided. They sort of ran into each other, and there was this sort of meeting, of these two groups that it wasn't going anywhere. So here was this idea of he'd been at this cathedral, but what he remembered were the sort of essential imperfections that made the place human.
Right.
That was what really stood out. And if something happened and didn't fit into the grand scheme of things, so what, right?
It's sort of finding the line.
Yes,
for
that's
all of
what
it is, right? My yardstick for that is if there's an error, which if I'm going back to building, like there's going to be an error. Like I'm not perfect at this. Like it's tough stuff. Right. My question to myself is, in a week, will I be able to find the error again?
Good question.
Will I go, oh, it's right there?
Yeah.
Like if I'm going to remember where it is and it's going to bother me.
Yes.
I'll fix it. But I do give myself more grace when it comes to making than other things.
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit we've talked a lot about self-compassion. That's some self-compassion.
Yeah.
Right? Recognizing where that line is so you don't constantly go over that line and leave yourself with no room to breathe.
Yeah. Well, now that I think about it, in the 5 seconds while you were speaking, I'm wondering if it's just I'm so Scottish and such a cheap person that it's like, is it worth the other $5 of material or the 13th trip to Home Depot that day?
You will have to come to a personal reckoning on that.
I think it's one or the other. It's really, I'm so cheap. I really am. So I appreciate you trying to give me credit for self-compassion.
I'm doing my best.
I really appreciate it. I just don't want to, be false about it. I pat myself on the back for something that's probably just another thing I'm weird about.
There you go. No comment.
No comment.
You can let us know.
Thanks. So we were also talking about this idea of Advent. And when I think of Advent, I think about this idea of waiting.
Yes.
Waiting, which seems like a passive word.
Yeah.
How can we make Advent active?
Yeah. I think waiting is sort of a negative word in our culture. Anytime usually you have to wait for something, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
We don't attach a positive meaning to it.
No.
But on the other hand, there are lots of things that we wait for that are good, right? Yeah. So I think that the question is, what are we waiting for, right? And there can be a sort of underlying patience or trust that we're waiting for new life to come into our lives, and we're not going to force that. We're not going to control it. We're going to let the Spirit find its way. I had to work that phrase in.
Good job. Yeah.
And when we do that, it's a more cooperative process. We're waiting. And yet we also know that there's a spiritual activity going on that depends on us not moving ahead of it, not getting out in front of it. I think about that line, is it from O Little Town of Bethlehem, where meek souls will receive him still, the dear Christ enters in. And so I would just say meek in this sense might mean cooperative, waiting, supple.
Yeah.
Right? And then when we create that space, that new life that we're looking for, that new spiritual life of more love, more compassion, then it's got some room to breathe.
Have we talked about my favorite nerdy thing about that phrase of the where is the comma in that phrase?
No.
So, as we normally sing it, where meek souls will receive him still. Right. The comma is before still.
Oh, where meek souls will receive him.
Still the dear Christ enters
That's
in.
great. Then it becomes really a promise, right? It's an ongoing thing. I like that.
Isn't that fun? I learned that in college because my college professor loves to take a huge break when he is accompanying the da dee da 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 dum. Da.
Nice big breath.
I love it. It's
That's great.
Yeah, that one got passed along.
Well,
It always cracks me up.
I love that line, and I'm going to think differently about it now.
It's fun, right?
It is.
Commas change a word, change the whole meaning, right?
It does. It does. And I think it does make it even more participatory, right? Where meek souls will receive him. It's sort of a question mark. Will they receive him?
Right.
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 And the promise is then still the dear Christ enters in. So I'm just thinking if we can approach Advent this year really with that spirit of waiting, that sense of waiting, and then it becomes a little bit of a magical question. So when will that new life appear and in what form? I think that can be an exciting thing to think about.
Absolutely. I think it's good stuff. How are we on time? I'm always checking the time with these things it's an illusion. I'm like, is it 10 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? So looking towards the week ahead, it is November, which I still...
All Saints Day today.
Yeah. It is All Saints Day today. Actually, as we are speaking, there's a service going on.
There is actually, yeah. There's a traditional service in Greenwich in the back country, right at the corner of John Street and Round Hill Road on All Saints Day every year at noon. Members of the two congregations get together and they go into the little cemetery that's right at the corner there. Beautiful small cemetery, and it's a time of remembrance where they then read the names of those associated with those two congregations who've died during the past year and any others who are beloved to those who've gathered at that time. Yeah. It's a very lovely tradition, and it's part of All Saints is that tradition of looking back to the people who've meant a lot to us as well, and who've been our mentors and guides and spiritual influencers, and we name them. So that's happening today.
That's lovely. I remembered because yesterday when you were mentioning it, there was a service at noon. I was sitting up at the organ going, is he doing the service? Because if he's doing the service, we're not live streaming.
Surprise.
Have we talked about this? And then our wonderful the Reverend Shannon White is doing the service.
Yes,
so
she is.
I was sitting at the organ going, who's doing this?
Yeah.
It's sometimes helpful that people can't see my face at the organ. I have no poker face.
And then moments of shock and surprise.
Yeah, I'm like, just going to wait and see what's happening.
Sure it's going to work out.
I'm sure, trust.
Yes, indeed. So yes, here we are. We're in, it's daylight savings time this coming weekend.
Yes.
So that changes things. And I've heard people talk a little bit more these days about the gathering darkness, because of our ongoing situation in response to COVID-19. I think there's a sense that, here comes winter again, right? So it's making us more inventive, though, about how we gather and stay in contact with each other. And we've certainly been enjoying many more social gatherings in the past few months than we had, for sure, from last year.
Right.
And I know that's making a big difference, and I'm going to do everything in my power, and I know we are in our community of faith, to create more and more of those social gatherings throughout the winter. We've got a few really interesting ideas that we're cooking on right now.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's always a nice thing.
That's important.
As we talked about in last week's podcast, that interconnection of us as a community is such an important thing.
Yeah. It's one of the things that we take for granted. I think there's been this sense that communities of faith will always be around somehow, but we've noticed in the last couple of decades that the number of churches are shrinking. So one of the things that we miss when churches aren't viable is that where do people gather?
Right.
Where do people do those things? There's not necessarily a given that anyone's just going to pick up that slack.
Right.
So I'm hopeful, and really how creative we can be over the winter months.
It's a funny thing too. It's this idea of sort of that kind of, are we entering back into society, or are we kind of pulling away? And this kind of like back and forth thing. I don't know about you, but anytime I see any like media, pre-COVID media, like, watching a vlog or something. So more real life. It takes me a second to realize what looks wrong about it to me.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, people are really standing very close to each other.
Isn't that amazing?
And there aren't any masks.
Yeah.
And it's such a funny thing. I mean, I think about when the pandemic first started and we really didn't know anything about it, about the transmission and how I think I remember going to Home Depot wearing gloves.
Yeah.
Because touch and surfaces was a big concern. So I remember I have hot pink gloves that I wear for for like doing staining and painting and stuff.
Vibrant colors.
Bring in some color, make it fun. So I remember wearing those to Home Depot, and then masks started, and I was like, oh, is this going to be a thing?
Yeah.
And then I remember feeling guilty for spending so much money on cloth masks.
Oh.
Thinking, well, this is only going to last a few months. They've been great.
Surprise. Yeah.
I've got a whole method for washing and hanging them now.
I'll bet.
I have a system.
I think many systems have emerged. Right?
I think, lots of systems. But it's that to the point, is I think there's also that adaptation of sort of the human spirit of we're kind of like, we'll figure it out as we go.
Yes. I think, learning to trust ourselves. We're going to figure it out. We're going to find a way.
Yeah.
I think about all the people over the years who've told me that when I felt like, oh, I'm never going to get through this. I'm never going to figure this out. People said, no, you'll find a way. We'll always find a way. And I think this is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
We're still finding a way. And I think to your point, we're still also figuring out the social thing, because although there's a hunger for gathering, there's also still a fatigue level that people are experiencing because of the different protocols that have to be managed and so on. So I think people want to gather. I think people also want to step back and just get some space. So it's going to be a while before we, really feel, so what is this going to look like when people are feeling good and want to get back, into the flow of things?
One thing I've found to be a positive and just lovely is the amount of, grace I feel like we all are giving each other, especially around social things, of like, if you text somebody and they don't text you back for like a week, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, we're all just making it through here. Like, I'm not going to give you a hard time.
Yes.
Like, we're all just kind of, there's this, to me, at least in my circle, it feels like we're all trying our best. And if I don't hear from you for 2 months, I'm assuming you're trying your best.
Yes.
Like, you okay? I'm okay. We're okay.
That's right.
There's not like there's not a thing about it. We're all just kind of here for each other when we can be. And,
I know.
Which I think is nice.
And I have to confess, I've really had to learn that, because as a pastor, if you reach out to someone and you don't hear back, you're thinking, uh-oh, what's wrong, right? And is something really, is this person ill? Is something happened? So you tend to worry a lot.
Oh, sure.
And until you get some word back that says, no, we're doing fine, but I just, I'm a little slow on the response time right now.
Yeah.
So I just have to be patient.
Yeah. I found both a good and bad thing, because I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago that I organized my phone and made it pretty. So all the icons have the same color scheme.
Oh, dear.
The pro and con to that is I don't have the red dots. So I don't know. I can see stuff on the lock screen if I miss something. But I don't get the you haven't responded to this person. You haven't responded to this person. Or like I have a almost pathological about the number of emails I keep unread in my inbox. It has to be below 50. And so but I don't have that number. And it's actually really nice.
That is interesting. Yeah.
It's been great.
We're finding little tricks.
To keep things mellow.
Yeah.
Should we podcast about hymns again this year, do you think?
I think we should.
That was fun.
Yeah, we got a lot of response to that.
Christmas hymns, right? Mm-hmm. So let us know, friends, if you have any hymns you'd like us to chat about. We could do it here. We could do it in the podcast. We could do whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think those carols are going to be played earlier and more frequently. We need the boost, right?
We need the boost. We were talking about this in the podcast that sometimes I sort of put my foot down when it comes to Advent. And I'm like, you get one Advent Sunday that's actually Christmas, but it might be more like 4 this year.
Indeed.
We'll do like O Come, O Come Emmanuel as the introit and then just a little town of Bethlehem.
Yeah. Open the floodgates.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think people really enjoyed knowing the background to some of these really familiar carols.
They're fun,
like, what's
right?
the story behind the story?
Yeah.
And amazingly, there are